Do you struggle with your music being too quiet? This video is for you. Welcome back to the Band Guide, where we use GarageBand to create professional sounding music. I'm your band guy, Colin, and today we're talking about what to do if your song is too quiet. Now, we're going to cover a lot in this video, but this video is not going to be a tutorial per se. I'm not going to go into GarageBand and show you how to make it louder. I've done a few videos on that, and I'll link to them. This is more like a resource to troubleshoot the problem, because there's a few different things that it could be. So this is really going to help you out. But before we get into that, I want to give you something to help you out. If you've been trying to make professional sounding music in GarageBand and you've been struggling with it, I've put together a completely free 6-step checklist to a pro mix in GarageBand. This checklist just walks through the 6 steps that all professional mixes have and how you can do them inside GarageBand completely free. There's a link in the description below, so be sure to pick it up. But let's go and talk about what to do if your song is too quiet. So the first reason that your song might be too quiet is because it's not mastered yet. And this is something that I didn't understand for a long time. I think a lot of people get confused by early on in this process. And that mixing and mastering are not the same thing. A lot of people switch them and use them interchangeably, but mixing is its own process and mastering is its own process. In mixing, we're focusing on taking all the tracks in our song and getting them to sound good together. In mastering, we're focusing on bringing up our song to a commercial volume and balance across our entire project. So if we're working on an EP or an album, we're making sure all the songs in that album are at a consistent volume, they feel right together, and that they're going to hold up in loudness and tone against commercial releases. But that's not until mastering. So we're not worrying about how loud it is until we've finished the mix. Then we go into the mastering process to bring up the volume and make it actually loud. But if you want to just quickly check your song outside of your car, I've done a video on how you can quickly make your song louder in seconds. I'll link to that above here. That's the process that you need to be thinking about if you're still in the mixing process. Now, if it's time to master your song, I've done a whole video on an easy approach to mastering in GarageBand that I'll link above here as well. We talk about some of the standards for loudness, how to understand what you should go for with loudness when you're working on mastering your song there. So be sure to check that out. But there's 2 other things that could be holding your mix back from seeming louder, even if you've gone through the mastering process. So let's talk about the second reason, which is that your tonal balance is off. This could be that you have too much low end or too much high end, too much brightness in your mix. So think bass, mid, and treble on car stereo, right? The bass is your low end, the mids are your mid range, and then the treble is the bright frequencies. If you have too much low end in your mix, it's going to eat up a lot of energy because low end uses a lot of sonic energy. It sounds confusing, but ultimately all that matters is that low end uses a lot of sonic power in your mix. So if you have too much low end, it's going to make the rest of the song sound quiet. So it's a constant balance of finding the right amount of low end that's enough that it feels full, but not too much where it starts to make the song feel quiet because the low end is taking up all the space in the mix. The other side could be that you don't have enough low end. And if we don't perceive enough low end, then we're going to think the mix is quiet because it's like, where's the fullness in the song? I keep turning it up, but it just gets harsher, not louder. So you need to have a balanced mix that has all of these components. And again, I'm going to point you back to that 6-step checklist to a pro mix, because getting the right volumes is the first thing. If you want enough low end, you might need to turn up that 808 or that bass guitar or that bass synth or whatever you're using for your low end. That might be the first step. And if not, then you might need to use a little bit of EQ to bring out a little bit more of that in your mix. So you need to be thinking about these things in the mixing stage to some extent as well. You need to get that balanced tonal element across your overall mix. Now, if you've finished your mix and you're moving into the mastering process and you're just now realizing this, you can do some subtle adjustments in the mastering process, a little bit of a cut in the low end if you have too much, or a little bit of a boost in the low end or low mids to give you some of that fullness, but it's a little bit harder. So getting this right in the mixing stage is really important if you can. And this has to all do with this idea that there's 2 perceptions of loudness. One is how loud it technically is, like if we're looking at a meter, how loud it says it is, the true volume, and then how loud we actually perceive it, because our way we perceive it is sometimes a little bit different than how technically loud it actually is. And so this is that element, right? If we have the tonal balance off, we're going to perceive it wrong. It's not going to seem loud, even if it technically is loud. Okay, and then the third reason that your song might not sound loud is because you haven't controlled the dynamics enough. Now, this is particularly important if you record anything live. So if you record a live vocal or a bass or a guitar or piano or particularly drums, if there's anything live in your song, this is particularly important. But it's also the case with some virtual instruments if you play them with a lot of dynamics. This has to do with how loud the loudest point is relative to the quieter point. So if you can imagine, let's say a bass guitar, if they hit the first note really hard and then that sustains, by the end of the sustain of that note, we're not really going to hear that note if it's a big pop of sound and then it trails off. And so we use something called compression to compress those big pops of sound so that it's never too loud at this point, but then it doesn't disappear over here at this point. This goes for vocals as well. If you hit some words really hard or some phrases really hard and then others quieter, it's going to feel like the vocal is way too loud at sometimes and way too quiet at other times. And that's going to put a cap on how loud that vocal can be in the song. And then any of those other moments that aren't as loud are going to feel too quiet. So we need to contain the dynamics, and we're going to do that with compression. The compressor is kind of the secret to containing the dynamics, but then also making a louder mix. If we don't contain the dynamics in the song, then our mix won't sound loud. That's just part of it. Now, depending on the genre, you might need less compression. Depending on the types of sources, you might need less compression. But compression is an integral part of the mixing process. So again, I'm going to point you back to that 6-step checklist to a pro mix that you can check out that goes through these 6 steps, including EQ and compression to balance your tone, to balance your dynamics. And if you do all these things and you get a mix that sounds really good and balanced and doesn't have any huge pops that are way too loud or way too quiet, then you can make a song that's loud. I promise it's nothing in GarageBand that's holding you back. It's about all these little things that add up together. But if you've gone through all of this and you still don't feel like you can make your mix loud, you still are struggling, even after the mastering process, to get it up to a volume that you're happy with, then come back next week. Next week, I'm going to be showing you something really cool that people don't really talk about. Even I didn't really know about until not too long ago. So I want to share it with you. It's a trick, if you will, a specific tool that can really help you get a louder final master that still has dynamics and doesn't have any of that weird pumping that doesn't sound good or professional. So definitely come back next week for that. Check out those other videos. Be sure to download the 6-step checklist to a pro mix in GarageBand. Let me know in a comment below if you struggle getting your song loud, and if you think it's any of these 3 things, and if not, what do you think it is that's keeping you from getting a loud final song? Let me know in the comments below. If this video is helpful, be sure to like, comment, and subscribe, and I'll see you next week with another video. One thing